This episode is brought to you by WeatherGuard Lightning Tech. At WeatherGuard, we support design engineers and make lightning protection easy. You're listening to the Struck Podcast. I'm Dan Blewett.
I'm Alan Hall.
And here on Struck, we talk about everything aviation, aerospace engineering, and lightning protection. All right, welcome back to the Struck Aerospace Engineering Podcast. I'm your co-host, Dan Blewett. On today's episode, we're going to talk about used planes, how long do they last, and what's the market like for older Airbus and Boeing aircraft, and is this going to hurt their sales of new aircraft? In our engineering segment, we'll talk about Hermeus. They are looking to create a Mach 5 aircraft, and they are working in conjunction with the Air Force to develop the next Air Force One Mach edition. So we'll talk about some of the engineering challenges that will come ahead of them. And then in our EVTOL segment, lots on Vertical Aerospace today, which they've been in the news quite a bit. $2 billion worth of orders from Avalon, which entails quite a bit of, I think it's 500 plane orders. American Airlines has also put an order for 250 planes, Virgin Atlantic 150. So there's a lot going on here, and it looks like they're going to go public with a SPAC merger. So lots in the news about Vertical Aerospace, and they admittedly have a beautiful looking prototype. I'm into it, but we'll see what Alan has to say. So first, Alan, let's chat about used planes. So especially popular right now is the Airbus A330 with smaller airlines who want to save money or startups, and they can be reduced sometimes up to close to 50% of their sticker price. What's the deal with the A330, and why is it such an attractive used plane? And what kind of routes can the A330 fly?
Well, it's a bigger airplane. It's a twin aisle airplane, so it's made for longer haul routes, similar to what like a 777 would do. But that airplane is much older in terms of when it was developed. The problem with anything that's twin aisle right now is that there's not a lot of long route flights going on anywhere in the world. Forget about United States to Europe is really hard still now. So there's just a depressed market. There's a lot of airplanes, twin aisle airplanes that are parked right now. And obviously the newest ones are going to retain most of their value, but the older ones are going to have a hard time, especially older designs. They're going to have a hard time maintaining their value through this just because they're older designs. You can buy a new one for also a discounted, a newer one for a discounted price. Why wouldn't I do that? You totally would. And I think a lot of times in these down situations, and COVID's been one big downer for the airline industry, airplane models just disappear for the most part, or they shift where their main focus is. They get because they're just less expensive to operate, and they can be operated by a lot of airlines that couldn't otherwise afford them. And so you'll see older airplanes show up in different parts of the world where they need something that's a little less expensive to operate and to own. This would be a good buying opportunity if you had cash to go out and do it. Airbus makes good airplanes. Boeing makes good airplanes. So pretty much if you buy one with a good service history on it and good maintenance records on it, you know what you're getting for the most part. And so, if you have cash and you're an airline, it may be a good buying opportunity. It's just whether the governments will open up enough where you can actually fly those airplanes without all your passengers being inconvenienced with still making people do COVID tests and all the other things that happen.
Well, if you get a bigger plane like an A330 cheap enough, does it make sense to fly it at less than capacity? Like, could you fly domestic routes in a 330 and never be full, or does that not make sense?
It doesn't make sense based on fuel prices. No, even though fuel prices have been relatively stable, the expectations that fuel prices are going to start bumping back up again as global traffic starts to increase. And once that happens, then part of your benefit goes away because fuel prices are so much a driver in profitability. Obviously, passenger load is one part of it, and then fuel costs on the other, and labor costs on the other. That's going to be the downside. And that's why you see a lot of the airlines, the more expansive, like a Delta or a United, or there's all kinds of at that level of airlines at that level are really pushing like fuel economy, right? That's why the Neos are have a big market and a great airplane, obviously. 737 Max is the same, trying to fill that same niche, which is lower fuel costs and still carry the same amount of passengers. So if you can get really burned if you're not careful about fuel prices, you have to pay attention to that and the age of the airplane and how much maintenance you're expected to put in on it. But if the price is right, yeah, you could do things in a different way than we would have done them 2 years ago, for sure.
Well, and you wonder what the pandemic will hold for all these companies as they're trying to save money and reorganize, or startups are trying to wiggle their way into more routes. I was just listening to on Guy Raz's How I Built This Podcast, the story of how JetBlue was founded. Their founder was on that show. It was really interesting. But you don't think of just, I'm going to start an airplane or an airline. That seems like a huge thing but airlines do come and go. I mean, they get started by someone with experience in the industry, finds a bunch of investors, buys some planes, get certified, blah, 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 and they're off on their way. It seemed way more accessible the way he talked about it, because after he left JetBlue, he started another airline called Azul in Brazil. It's just like, I'll just start another airline. It's like, that just seems, again, starting an airline seems so big, like utility scale, right? And so, but it's a real thing, especially probably more so in other countries where maybe the barrier to entry is a little bit less. If you're not in the U.S., it seems like the barrier for airport space in the U.S. is really, really high. But then again, I don't know the intricacies of world airliner economics. But
but you're paying gate fees. I mean, there's only so many gates at the big airports. So you need to find a way to get into them. And small airlines are pretty much kicked out. That's why you don't see them a lot of times, except at smaller, more unique airports, just for that reason. So it's not easy to start an airline. It's easy to lose money in an airline. That we've seen that time and time again. But to make money in an airline is really, really hard. You have to pay attention to everything and where the money is going, and be very careful about it. About what, and even though some of the smallest smaller expenses, so to speak, can end up biting you. Like if you cut maintenance too tight and you have an accident, man, your airline's in big trouble, real big trouble. So it takes a lot of people with experience in that industry to even broach it. Even people with experience still struggle in that industry. It's not easy. It's a very difficult marketplace.
And airplanes, they age more so by pressurization cycles and flight hours. I mean,
flight hours,
is it
takeoff and landings?
I mean, tell me a little bit about the pressurization stuff. I mean, the fuselage gets stressed, the wings get stressed when it takes pressure.
Yeah, sure.
But these planes are obviously super well built, like they're overbuilt, right? So, I mean,
somewhat.
You talked about the maintenance records and all that stuff. I mean, where would, if you were looking through a plane's maintenance record, where would you be like, you know what, this one's not for us, this one might give us trouble, or this one we're a little uncertain about? I mean, where does it go wrong in the maintenance cycle?
Well, if the airline or the operator hasn't maintained it to the OEM requirements, like it hasn't had regular, it hasn't met its mandated inspections, for example, or it's missed one, or it's late for one, or they haven't dealt with some of the service bulletins that may not be immediate. So the service bulletins or the advisory says you have a year to fix this thing and you haven't fixed it. Those kind of alarm bells start going off, like, okay, that's just adding cost onto me to go off and do all that stuff. So I'm going to ask for a lower price for the aircraft. Our aircraft are relatively well built. If you're buying an aircraft from certain parts of the world where maintenance is not going to be all super duper and may not be done as well as it may be done in Europe, you're going to be a little more cautious, and you're going to do a lot of looking on the aircraft before you decide to purchase it. So there's just a lot of small details. It's like buying a used vehicle, right? If you're buying a used vehicle from someone you got a pretty good chance that's going to be a good car. If you're buying it from some random person off the street that has abused the car, it's going to be like that. It's going to be something you're going to put a lot of money into. So airplanes are not much different.
All right, so in our engineering segment today, we're going to talk about Hermeus and their goal of creating a Mach 5 jet and changing, commercial air travel. And of course, one of the partnerships they have is with the Air Force to help develop this supersonic Air Force One way off in the future. So, Alan, I know it seems like Hermeus has been kind of, under the radar a bit. I guess that's a pun, right? That's a pun. Yeah, radar. Planes have radar. But yeah, I mean, they're working on Air Force One. I mean, does that seem... I have a couple of questions for you. Number one, what is a realistic timeline here? Because we've seen Airline fail. Boom is now at the forefront, with United doing an order with them recently. But this is obviously a tough problem to solve. And we've also talked about whether or not we need supersonic flight. But what are some of the hurdles that are maybe a little bit lesser known? We were talking off camera about just simple things like the toilet. How does the toilet function at Mach 5 versus typical commercial airliner speed? I mean, all those things are actually a pretty big consideration. Right.
You're putting people, as soon as you put people inside of this tube, you have a lot of considerations. How do you keep the pressurization right? How many cycles can it handle in pressurization? It's flying high altitudes, or there's a lot of stresses on the airframe. What do the seats look like? What does a crash look like? What do the seats look like? Is there an entertainment system on this airplane? Is there all is it heated? Can you keep your feet warm while you're sitting in this thing? All those little system things which get overlooked at times because the airplane is so cool looking, it goes so fast, are really important to the person who's going to use it. If it's 30 below in the cabin, no one's going to fly it. And that's just the kicker, is that there's so many problems to solve simultaneously, and all these systems have to work together seamlessly for thousands and thousands of hours. It becomes an overwhelming engineering project. And when you attach going past Mach 1, just leave it there. Forget about Mach 5 for a minute. When you go past Mach 1, those difficulties get much bigger, as we had seen with the Concorde. Even though the Concorde is a 1970s, 60s, 70s design, it's still super complicated. And I don't see that going away. And from a business standpoint, the amount of cash burn to create the engine and something that's reliable, the fuel system what's that fuel system look like? How does it handle extreme colds and extreme temperatures? What's the structure look like? There's just so many problems to solve, and a limited pile of money you can use to solve them all. And that's the problem. I think that's the bigger issue, is how do you solve all those problems simultaneously, and you don't have anything to work off of. There's no cheat sheet to this, right? No one's really done this before. So everything's new. Everything's new. And everything is $10 million to solve, right? But you have 1,000 of those problems. And that's what it is. It's just what it is.
Well, and it shows that they raised a $16 million Series A round of funding back in October of 2020, and $16 million is like a Kleenex in the aircraft industry. I mean, it's just it's nothing.
Nothing.
So, I mean, this is something that's going to take multiple $1 billion, I would assume, to get to fruition. And I mean, is this decades away? I mean, what are we looking at here?
Depending on what the end goal is, or what's the thing you're going to plant your flag on and say, we've done it. I don't know what that looks like. If it's a business aircraft or a corporate aircraft that goes past Mach 1, that's something to hang your hat on. That's not easy to do. Not many companies have even really broached it, really. So that would be something worthwhile, I think, to say we've accomplished it. I just don't, Dan, it's an overwhelming thing. I don't know how you get to an answer without having large amounts of government funding or large amounts of investment funding. I mean, billions to get there. I just don't see how it happens. It's like going to the moon, right? It's about that same scale. It really is. Yeah,
and plus with a lot of these test rockets, like there's no people on them, right? So they can test. It seems like you can test a rocket out a little easier than a plane, and that might be completely wrong. I don't know. But like you said, there's just different challenges.
Yeah, there's different challenges, but I don't like using analogies, but just to lay out the engineering complexities to it. Even during the Apollo missions, they had the fire on Apollo 1, and that's not something they necessarily expected. They did after it happened. The accident with Apollo 13, which was related to some heaters and a stir in one small part of this huge, massive spacecraft, went wrong and had an explosion. Those are just part of the complexity with dealing with people in upper atmosphere going very fast. That's just part of the deal. Everything has to work flawlessly, and we're not quite there yet on the aircraft side. On the spacecraft side, we're getting a lot closer, right? Tesla's done a lot of good things, or SpaceX has done a lot of good things in terms of making reusable rockets, but we haven't necessarily translated that back into the aircraft side. Just haven't yet.
Well, and that's what jumps out to me. It's like, why this challenge seems so big. Why is it being tackled by a startup company in the dozens of employees rather than someone like Airbus or Boeing, or just like a gigantic company that could, maybe, like, if this is $1 billion failure, that's not the end of Boeing, right? That's not the end of Airbus. It's not that much money to them. It's still a lot of money. But,
yeah, it's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
I think if they're going to develop a new engine, and they've got some unique technology to develop a Mach 5 engine, that's a goal. I mean, that's a goal we're shooting for, because you've simplified the number of problems you're going to go off and solve, and you're going to focus on this one area, and you're going to bring in expertise about propulsion to go do this massive engine project. That's an accomplishment, and the Air Force, the United States Air Force, would be really interested in that. Is say, hey, there's new engine technology. They obviously, in my opinion, what they would do is they start shopping that engine technology around and hook them up with someone like a GE or Pratt and Whitney that makes high thrust engines, and have done it for a long time successfully. And say, you're going to partner with Pratt and Whitney. Here you go. We love the technology. Now let's implement it. And Pratt & Whitney has the capability to do that. I think that's where it goes. The aircraft side just seems too much for everybody to take on right now.
Yeah, and their goal is to get to a demonstrator in about 5 years. That's what their plans are. And they have been testing an engine that they moved really fast to get to that, from design to prototype to testing.
Right.
So they've done good work,
Yes.
It seems like, thus far.
Yeah, absolutely.
But still a lot to do.
There's still a lot to do, yeah.
All right, so in our final segment today, we're going to talk about Vertical Aerospace. They've just had a splash of headlines recently, a lot of orders, and of course the news that they're going to go public potentially in a SPAC merger. So as mentioned, American Airlines and Virgin Atlantic both have invested and put in orders. So American Airlines, 250 aircraft, Virgin Atlantic, 150 aircraft. And Americans also put some money, $25 million, into a fund just in investment money. And then there are some other sale orders as well. Avalon has put a $2.2 billion order in. So a lot of money going to Vertical Aerospace, and they seem to have been one that, $2 billion from Avalon. But it seems like they've been a little under the radar as far as, like news, just in the news. Like Joby's been sort of a darling. Right. Archer's been in the news a lot recently. Yeah. Everyone seems like they're just jockeying for position. Right. But they have over 1,000 aircraft pre-orders, and Vertical Aerospace seems set to go public. So
that's crazy.
I mean, Alan, where do you fall? I like their design. It looks super sleek. Yes. I haven't seen a test flight. It looks like they're still in development. But it seems like people really believe in their concept.
They do. I mean, obviously, for the amount of money they're talking about, somebody believes in it. And that's a really good start. We haven't seen an aircraft yet in terms of prototype flying. Maybe there is one. I haven't seen it. That doesn't mean that it's not going on. I just haven't seen it yet. The marketplace is just weird right now, in terms of like what is the American Airlines doing, and why? Like what is the potential upside cash flow from American Airlines working in the 5-passenger aircraft electric market. What is that? Where is the economic proposition in this? And the SPAC money is just explosive. That's the only way to describe it, is an explosion of cash. And why? What has been proven to this point that you're going to be able to recover that investment in a relatively short amount of time? If you're an angel investor or a kind of a venture capitalist investment group, and you're hoping to take that initial investment and flip it 10 times, right? So you put in $1 million, you're going to get 10 million out in ideally 5 years, some short time frame like that, right? You're 10 times your money, or at least 3 or 4 times your money, right? There's been no airplane project in my lifetime that I can remember that it's ever done that. But, obviously airplanes are not something that you and I use every day. And what they're talking about is making an airplane I'm going to use every day. There's just so much risk in this. And it just seems like there's an imbalance in the marketplace. Isn't it weird to say, like, it was like the housing market in 2007 and 2008. There's an imbalance going on. It feels like there's this weird imbalance on the electric vehicle market. Like, there's so much cash, but there's so little delivered yet that has to even out at some point, right? Market's correct at some point. What that looks like is going to be scary.
Yeah, and there might be consolidation, or
maybe that's the play.
There's going to be some winners and looters,
right? I mean, are you hoping that Airbus buys you, or Embraer buys you, or Mitsubishi purchases you, or Toyota purchases you, or Honda, somebody? Maybe that's the play. Is maybe that they figure it's like some of these SaaS software companies that they've got $1 million business or a $5 million business, and they want to sell it for $200 million. Maybe that's the play. Maybe they can get somebody to pay that money. But airplanes just doesn't. The aircraft market, and aerospace market hasn't historically done that. Just hasn't. Not without special technology or a special sort of cash generating machine. And in theory, I guess the electric vertical takeoff and landing market would be like an Uberish cash generating machine. But even Uber's not a cash generating machine yet, Dan, is it? I mean, am I missing something about Uber?
Yeah,
I don't think so.
I don't know where they are, if they're profitable yet, but they haven't been profitable for their history, at least as of 2020. I think they're getting closer and doing better because they've been raising fares, right. And I think some of their acquisitions end up being pretty good for them. But I mean, they were just a loser for a long time, and that was just the American growth, the American way, like just grow at all costs, and you don't have to make money. We'll just keep getting more investment and then go public. Then all the investors get a huge windfall, and everyone's happy except the company doesn't actually make money.
It's sort of the Amazon way, right?
Yeah.
And that's the Amazon model, but that model doesn't apply to most businesses. It just doesn't.
And of course, Amazon did become profitable.
Sure they did.
I mean, they kind of fluctuate when they just say, hey, we want to spend more and we're going to start reinvesting to the future. But yeah, I mean, they are a little bit of an outlier where they've actually been profitable despite that gigantic growth and a lot of investment in the future. Yeah. All right, well, that'll do it for today's episode of Struck. If you're new to the show, thank you so much for listening, and please leave a review and subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out the WeatherGuard Lightning Tech YouTube channel for video episodes, full interviews, and short clips from the show. And follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Our handle is @WGLightning. Strike Tape, WeatherGuard Lightning Tech's proprietary lightning protection for radomes, provides unmatched durability for years to come. If you need help with your radome lightning protection, reach out to us at weatherguardaero.com. That's weatherguardaero.com.